Our afternoon sessions are going to be about inventory and audits. This is a new session that we put into the program this year because we realized folks wanted it covered. We have three speakers. They're going to be Sandra Berry, University Archivist for Florida State University, Donna Baer, who's the Associate Registrar for Jacksonville Zoo, and Liz Rogers, who's the Assistant Registrar at the Harn Museum of Art. As the morning ones did, we're just going to go ahead and do all the presentations in a row, and at the end of it, I'll pop on the mic and we'll do some Q&A. After that, we'll do our afternoon discussion period, and then we'll do a wrap-up, and we should be able to get out of here by 3 o'clock. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my mic and hand the mic up to the folks up at the Comer, and our first speaker, as I said, is Sandra Berry.
All right, so everybody hearing me okay? I hope we get started. So I'm at Florida State University. I will give you just a quick background. When I first started working at actually University of Central Florida, we had a very large move, and we decided to rearrange all of our collections. And we had to do a pretty basic inventory to figure out where things needed to go. That was my first experience with inventories, and I learned a lot about what to collect and kind of what to do and not do. In going to Florida State, I came into a situation where I didn't know where almost anything was. There were things everywhere in every sort of condition and location and naming convention, and it was a trick. So it took quite a long time. It took almost 2 years to do a complete inventory of all of our collections. There was no extent. We didn't know. So it was a lot of work and a lot went into it. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, is from that more archives situation, but I've always been in libraries to do it. So I'll get started. Reasons that you might want to inventory and audit: obviously learning your collections. If you suddenly become the curator of an archive or other sort of collection, it's the best way to learn what you have and give you ideas about what you might want to do with it. In libraries and archives especially, I know for everyone else as well, but we are very focused on access. So we acquire, we preserve, and we provide access. That's kind of the archivist mantra. So having a location and a description for your things is kind of essential. If you can't find it, nobody else can find it, and then it's not very valuable. This is also an information gathering, and that sounds pretty basic, but it really is. This is an opportunity for you to get, hopefully, not just the things that you're looking for, but maybe some other information that you can use later, which then gives you a better way to make decisions about how you're going to manage your collections. Again, you might have a specific impetus for doing an inventory or an audit, but you should be able to get enough of that information to make decisions from everything from processing, reprocessing, deaccessioning, destruction, moving things. I mean, there's just a multitude of things that you can do with that. Accountability is a big one, and there's different kinds of accountability. There are the accountability, if you're the curator of that collection, it's just your responsibility, and you have to be accountable for being able to talk about your collections, explain what you're doing with your collections and what they consist of. And then there's accountability to your institution, to your donors, and those other kinds of things. There are also, of course, the issue ones. So if you're being audited, that's not always considered a positive thing, but it does happen. And especially in libraries, more so generally in libraries than in archives. I've never been audited per se, but we do get audited with our rare books, and so that's kind of an exception. The rare books have specific cataloging records. They have assigned values, where archival collections can sometimes be a little bit different. We do get regular audits for those to make sure that everything's actually there and that we have accounted for it. So that's an interesting one, and that is actually a state of Florida and university policy. But you can have other kinds of issues that lead you to do inventory. There's another way to think about it too. When we say the word inventory, it can be a little bit semantic in terms of what we're talking about. So just another thought for us in archives is that inventory is a part of doing archival processing. So when we say, there are all kinds of ways that I'm going to use the word inventory, and I don't want to confuse anybody. But we take an initial inventory when we accession something. We take an inventory before we start doing what we call arrangement and description of those collections. And for us, a finding aid is actually a standardized archival professional inventory, if you think about it. So some people use those things interchangeably. So libraries, just generally, so many books, oh my goodness. When I've dealt with large types of inventories generally in libraries, it's been about weeding books, moving things, and trying to figure out how to improve services. There are other kinds of audits that are done, and some libraries as an institution will do an internal audit, and a lot of departments will do internal audits. And that could be anything from services, finances, your digital databases, all these other things. And again, space issues can determine when that happens. It also can be about determining value, and this applies both for archives and other types of collection. I can go through all these collections, and while I'm flagging and doing inventory, find something that's really valuable, or find a bunch of stuff I really don't want anymore. And those are some of the things that happen. For libraries, generally, another type of audit is if you're going to work on cataloging. So think about the statewide, for state institutions, we share a catalog. We had to do a series of audits of what kinds of records we have to determine what kinds of things needed to happen for us to all share the same records for books and other items. And so that's another kind of an audit you would do to determine what needs to happen next. So specifically looking at archives, we have manuscripts and archival collections. And again, how these words are used depends on your area of expertise. The way I'm looking at it and talking about manuscripts as personal papers or family papers, and archival collections as institutional organizational papers. That's very general. There are some other uses of those words, but we don't need to go there yet. For us, we do end up with objects in our collections. Most of us think of as paper-based collections. That's not true. We also have huge digital collections, but typically we inherit or collect related items that are objects. So anthropological objects, we had a collection like that. That was fun to take care of in inventory. Art, yes, so we end up with art collections. University of Central Florida, we had a small art collection that had been donated, but it was under our care, and of course, it had a different value assigned to it, and we had to do separate inventory for it. Unusual items. So in archives, that's the best question. What's the weirdest thing that you've ever found? I have a long, long list, but I can tell you in the last 2 weeks, we found rooster claws in a collection. It was a politician's collection. Apparently, had been to visit some cockfighting ring thing, and somebody gave him rooster claws, and I don't know why he had them, but it's one of those things. You find stuff. I find food. I find, yeah, scrapbooks, especially at FSU. I have scrapbooks that have every imaginable type of material in them. Anyhow, individual items. So looking at things that are in flat files, items of high value are something that an inventory might uncover that need to be dealt with differently. All right, so for doing an inventory, I'm not going to throw up any sample forms. This is pretty much recording basic information about what you have. What's the title of it? If you know what the title of it is, because you might find the random box of stuff and you have no idea. You might have to give it a temporary name. But collecting information about where it's located, what it's called, the extent of that, the size of it. For us in archives, is it processed? Is it unprocessed? What is the stuff? Are there preservation issues? Are there privacy issues, which is a big one? Some of you might know about out in Oregon where the university archivist lost their position because they didn't assess the collection. It was unprocessed and private material was handed out, and it turned into a very large scandal. So that can happen. So in doing an inventory, it might be helpful to document things like, is this a restricted collection? Does it have personal records? What's the deal? So that's something I always tick off the box when I do things. Donor information, which can be helpful in determining some of these other questions. Say, I don't know what this object is or this item. Those are things to keep. Statistics. One of the things that you're going to get out of doing an inventory, hopefully, is to have some reportable data. So you want to be able to have that. I can report that I have 2,588 linear feet of publications. Those are things to keep in mind. And of course, it allows you to do planning. Most of the time, you're doing inventory as a step in a plan to do other things with your collections. Audits are a little bit different, and again, it depends on how you want to use that. The audits are usually looking for a specific issue and how to deal with it. But for planning, of course, you can use this inventory for space, how to decide if you need more staffing. How am I going to spend my budget? Do I need more budget? So responsibilities are a big one, and it really depends on what's the purpose of this audit/inventory. So as the archivist, I'm responsible when I'm processing the material for whatever inventory that I create. When I then do a donor agreement, I have to be accurate. So I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible to provide access to this collection, and therefore, how good of a job am I doing? Am I being consistent? Do I make sense when I do these inventories? There's also, you may work with a collection manager or you may be one. So I was lucky to have a collection manager at FSU that I could work with to help do these inventories. So she was responsible for the overall collections for all of our division, and she would assist me in helping me curate and do inventories on my particular aspect of the collection. There's also the other little twist, which is if you have records, and we talked a little bit earlier about having institutional records in museums and other spaces, do you understand the basic concept of the records life cycle, and are you going to then have to be responsible for those records if you take them or deal with them, and how are you going to inventory that stuff? So as a records manager, I'm not one, but I deal with part of the life cycle of the records, and there's a tiny little diagram there that's just very brief. I'm the end of the line, aside from the dumpster, for a lot of things. I get to decide at the end of this record's usefulness, does it have historic value? Am I going to keep it? I'm then responsible for it. And in doing inventory, I have to account for what happens to those materials, and that's what we call disposition, which a lot of you call deaccessioning and getting rid of. But at the end, it's what happens to it and who's responsible for having destroyed it or kept it. In my case, I deal with Boston Business Services because they are our records management liaison officer to the state of Florida. So there are other kinds of things you have to keep in mind. Again, what is the inventory for? You may not need to be responsible for these things, but it's good to be aware of other factors that might affect how you do your inventory. Timelines and intervals. So this may be on your own timeline. I was pretty lucky in that it was going to take as long as it took because we had so much stuff and it was everywhere and we needed to know. But you might be on an interval. So I mentioned the audit of books. That's a thing. It was done monthly. So they would pick out 30 random books from the collection of 10,000 and do an audit, basically, and check and see if everything was there where it was supposed to be and what condition it was in. And that, I think, was partly for insurance, but also it's this accountability audit thing. Apparently, it hadn't been done for many, many years, and something went missing, and that usually sparks, hey, there's an audit. We need to take care of this. So complete versus partial inventories. I think this slide and the next one are almost a little bit interchangeable. So we can talk about where you might apply these things. So again, new to the collection, I had to do a complete inventory. Again, it took a very long time, but I was also doing a lot of other things. So it's going to depend on the immediacy of the need. Moving and renovations. It is not smart to go and move a whole bunch of stuff and throw it on trucks and then take it all back out of the truck and think that you know that you have everything or where it goes. Same thing goes for renovations. Anytime you're going to move things around, take an inventory before you touch it. Changing missions. Now, could be a good or a bad thing, depending on if you want to keep things or get rid of them. If your institution decides that its mission is changing and you no longer need certain collections, it might be time to do an inventory or a partial inventory. If you transfer your collection to another institution, that happens sometimes, not very often, knowing what you're transferring. There could be some legal ramifications, and especially in terms of donors. Serious dysfunction. Okay, so things are really bad. You walk into the room, things are falling from the ceiling, boxes are floating, who knows? Or things have just been badly mismanaged for a long time and it's time to fix things. Good reason. You're going to do a complete inventory. Things that are lost, this one depends. If a thing is worth $2 million, you may do a complete inventory to find it. If it's not, it might be a partial inventory to figure out where things have gone. It depends. Depends on how high profile that thing is. Loss and theft, and by loss, I mean natural disaster. So you have a hurricane, you pull everything out of the boxes to dry them, lay them on tables, you've had to have a conservator come in, things have shifted and moved and are all over the place. You've lost some of the stuff. When you're done with that process, or maybe during that process, you will have to do an inventory. Theft, of course, again, it depends on to what extent. We hope that doesn't happen, but it does. Again, it might have been systematic theft. We all remember the guy who used to go into reading rooms and delicately slice out parts of manuscripts. How many did he get away with before? How many things were stolen before he was caught? So again, and it may again depend on who's in authority of that and says, hey, we have to do this inventory. Mine, at least, I got to choose. So partial inventory. So for me, if I have an archival collection, I would consider a partial inventory. There's a series within this archival collection that's described as student records. Oh yeah, huge flag, privacy. We have laws, for privacy. We have FERPA. I'm probably going to audit that section of a processed collection, or I'm going to go ahead and re-inventory it to make sure everything is okay. I don't know what the person before me did, but I'm now in charge of this collection. I'm responsible for it. If I violate someone's privacy by providing access or something to that effect, then that's on me. Again, we talk about accountability a lot. It's being able to say, yeah, I did an inventory of that collection. I didn't find those materials, so I don't think this collection is as valuable as we think. Let's not spend time and resources on it. Back again to decision making. I use the inventory that I did pretty much moving forward to go back and think about what I'm going to do next year. What are my priorities? Do I want to process a lot of collections? Do I need to take care of a backlog? Do we have preservation issues that I found during doing my inventory? So again, planning is important and lost items. So for methodology, there are methodologies out there. It's not something that's necessarily trained in archival practice. As long as you follow some basic rules, which are make sure you're systematic and you can replicate your inventory, decide on the level and the extent to which you're going to do your inventory. You cannot capture all information at one time, but you want to make it worth the time. Make sure the people who need to be involved are involved before you make decisions about what you're going to do, so that you actually capture stuff that people need and want. The ethics part has more to do with audits. If you're one of the people in charge of the materials and there is an audit for legal purposes, you probably shouldn't be doing the audit. Things like that. It's important. Authority. Do you have the authority to carry this out? Do you have the authority to do the reporting on this? That's something I probably would get in writing. Yes, there are standards out there for measuring things. Society of American Archivists and ALA, the Rare Books Manuscript section, often go together to create standards for everything from measuring. And then make sure that you use your legacy data to your advantage. So, of course, accession records, donor stuff. If you have archives management software, use that. All right, last one. So basically, inventories are giant projects. So project management is really important. Make sure that you spend enough time planning. You can't plan forever, but make sure that you do spend a good time with that. Document your methods so that, again, you can repeat them. You have your results. Document how you're going to communicate with each other and how you're going to document this stuff. Make sure it's backed up. And then, of course, use and reuse these statistics over and over again if you can. Make sure you have a timeline and then budget accordingly given whatever staff and time, again, authority that you have. And just as a very last thing for the example, so after 2 years, I can say this, and I have multiple graphs like this that parse out all the different types of statistics that I have. I can go back and add to them because I know they're pretty accurate because my methodology was good. I can add on it. I don't have to go back and do the whole thing again. I can do partial things, but I always have this base set of really good information to work from. It lets me make annual reports. It lets me make pitches to boards. It lets me do a lot of things. So just make sure that you're complete in how you go about doing an inventory or an audit, and it can really help you out, and you can use it forever.
Inventory and audits from zoos and aquariums point of view. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than I think what we've been talking about this whole time. And I'm actually going to be talking about our living collections, not our Artifacts education collections. I did survey a good bit of the Florida zoos to see what other people did. So this information isn't just all coming from the Jacksonville Zoo.
So I just contacted them, and AZA, as our governing body, requires at least one complete inventory per year. Most everyone I talk to performs multiple inventories based on their own policies, and most do both complete and partial inventories, and you'll see why in just a minute. Okay, at the Jacksonville Zoo, we do at least one complete inventory, which we call an eyeball inventory, every year. The other thing I need to say is that the people caring for the animals, they do an inventory daily. You go out there, you make sure it's there, you make sure it's alive. So we're not talking about, we're talking about our records sort of inventory to make sure that our records reflect what is actually outside. But every zoo, aquarium, they make sure the animals are there and still alive. Or if not, then they report it. So our eyeball inventory, basically we provide a list to each of the different areas, the animal managers of the animals in their care, and we expect them to go out there and put eyeballs on every one of those animals. And if something from our list is not correct for whatever reason, didn't get updated or whatever, then we'll make those corrections. We do what you might call a partial inventory every month, and we provide this to our finance department. And as far as audits go, they're audited every year because everything in the zoo is owned by the state of Jacksonville.
Pretty much we have a system in place for, entering births, deaths, escapes, things like that. So typically your inventory report is going to actually match what's out there, but occasionally staff forgets to fill out a form when something dies, or we send it to another zoo, and being registrar not being out in the zoo, if it's not a big animal that we all know about, it's entirely possible if we didn't see that form, it's still in our records list. So that's why we do the monthly, and we go through and we basically are like, okay, do we have information on where this animal went? And make sure it's there or it isn't. In most of the institutions, a records manager or registrar is responsible for the inventory, but they all have their animal managers that do the actual counting. Almost all of them that I spoke to do monthly inventories, and most of them are complete inventories, although in some cases, partial inventories are all that is possible. So like at Jacksonville, we have striped newts, and they lay hundreds of eggs at a time. We accession them as the eggs develop past 50%. However, they're really, really tiny, and we get an estimated count, and we'll do a census sort of count for them until they all hatch. And once they all hatch and we can count them individually, then we will update our records. From what I could understand, everybody has their own method. It's very similar, with the registrar providing the list and the managers going out and correcting or not correcting. A lot of places use their inventory for board reports, and we all use it for permitting. There are USDA permitting, there's the state permitting, and also some federal permitting that requires annual reports based on your actual collection, depending on the species that you have. So, and one of the places that I talked to is actually for-profit institutions. So before I realized, most of the zoos that are not for profit don't necessarily have insurance on their animals, but the for-profit ones do, and they do their inventories for insurance purposes. So that was a little bit new to me to find out, and there's just some pretty pictures there. Now, aquariums were a little bit different, and obviously for their mammals, birds, and reptiles, they do complete inventories. But fish and invertebrates are estimated counts, except for the ones, the elasmobranchs, which are sharks and rays, and other large fish that they can individually identify. Because if you guys have been to an aquarium and you see a giant school of like thousands of fish, they can't go and count that once a month. It's just not possible. And in those situations, they also get eaten. They die. And I shoved this lovely picture of their cockroaches. Can you imagine having a cockroach collection and having to count all cockroaches? So a lot of times they're estimated counts. Now, what I was told, though, is that once they, like for aquariums, if they have to break down or move the aquarium, they will do an actual physical count of everything as they're transferring animals. That's probably the only time that they'll get a complete actual count. They really love it when that happens because it brings all the records back up to date, but it doesn't happen that often. One of the aquariums that I spoke to will use photos of their large schools of fish, kind of like you do wild censuses. Take a big picture across an area and overlap them, and then just count what's in the picture, and it gives you a pretty accurate census. But again, it's not going to be 100%. There's going to be a little bit of error involved in that. They did say that in the aquariums that researchers often use their inventories just to determine what kind of projects they can do. Aquariums have some issues that are a little bit more difficult. Some of their animals are colonies, like corals. It's very hard to count. They all look like one big thing. Fish get eaten by other fish or go missing, and their aquarists or biologists don't always agree on species as they come in. At least that's what they told me was part of the problem. So these are just some more pretty pictures. the documentation, the run for inspections, board reports. Our state has some, wildlife classifications that needs to have inventories run for, and they're reviewed by inspectors.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Rogers. So I work at the Harn Museum of Art, and we did an inventory project, a complete inventory in 2014. So I will highlight some of the things we found during that time. Also, wanted to point out some of the purposes of inventory that we found. Essentially, inventory and audit serve to account for your collection. Registrars are entrusted to care for the objects in their custody and also are accountable to know where their objects are located and their condition. Inventories also aid in documenting and updating what objects are in the custody of the institution. For instance, in catastrophic events, these updated records will provide an accurate representation of what is on site. And also, inventory can serve as a time to clean up your records. This is time to identify undocumented objects, old loans, temporary custodies, and missing objects. For the Harn Museum, not only do we strive to adhere to best practices and standards of the field, but the inventory process is also required by our university auditors. The benefits. Inventory benefits the institution by building confidence with our donors, lenders, and constituents. When you know what objects you have, where they are, and the condition of them, you're reassuring that you can care for your objects in their custody. Inventory also displays how well your movement and documentation procedures are working. Are you finding things without tags? Are things located where they're listed? Were the locations accurate in your system? And if not, what part of the procedure is breaking down? Do you need to retrain certain personnel? And also, inventory can help shed light on issues that arise when you're physically documenting the moving of the object. It also aids in accessibility. Are you able to retrieve objects for study, research, and loans? And also aids in preservation. During inventory, you can assess the object's condition and storage area. Does it need conservation? Is the object overcrowded? And is there a better method to store it? Timeline. So each institution's collection management policy should state the frequency and type of inventory that is required for their collections. An inventory and audit should be completed on a regular basis, and based on the size of the collection and the amount of personnel involved, a complete inventory should be completed every 5 years, with a minimum of completing a 100% inventory every 10 years. The Harn collection management policy required the registrar to perform a complete inventory every 6 years, and as you can see, that is our timeline on a yearly rotating basis. We do a sectional collection. It is important to make time to conduct an inventory. Yes, it will disrupt day-to-day operations, but it's crucial to collection care management. And in order to get a sense of the timeline for your institution, it's wise to start with a small sample inventory project. That is, if your database has all of the locations listed and you're not starting from scratch. Establishing responsibilities. So a basic inventory record will document what you have in your collection and the current location of the object. The accession number and the tombstone information of the object should be recorded along with the location and staff member's name and date that the inventory occurred. Depending on the scope of the inventory or audit, the object's condition may be assessed, new photography uploaded, or storage condition assessed and changed. Besides conducting a complete inventory for audit purposes, inventory can be beneficial when implementing other projects, for instance, storage renovations, digitizing the collection, sectional collection moves. These are times that complete or partial inventory can be done. When the Harn built a new Asian wing with a specific Asian storage room, we migrated all of our Asian art to that storage room, and during this time we were able to assess the storage and update the labeling of the objects. Partial versus complete. These are the two main types of inventory processes. A partial inventory is concerned with a section of the collection. The groupings of the section can range from objects in one storage room or to a collecting genre. For instance, the Harn conducts partial inventories on each collecting area each year.
Partial inventories are harder to reconcile since you're only documenting a small sample of the collection. A complete inventory or 100% inventory documents the objects that are supposed to be in the institution's custody. This includes TCs, loans, extended loans, props, accessories, and so on. One of the benefits to a complete inventory is that it can be reconciled against the institution's records. Every area of the museum is checked and every item recorded, so essentially everything can be accounted for. Methods. Using your sampling inventory as an evaluation to your inventory process. The next step is to confirm which inventory methods work for your institution. Having a team or at least 2 dedicated employees to conduct the inventory is ideal. One member can serve as a documenter while the other member handles the art and assesses the numbering and condition of the artwork. We found it beneficial to rotate duties periodically to break up the monotonous quality of the job. So after choosing your team, the next step is to determine your process. If your collection management software contains most of the locations for your objects and is predominantly accurate, you can use the system to print out inventory spreadsheets. Using the object by location filter aids in creating a systematic way to move through the institution. This way, you can assess each area at a time and catch up anything that may be missing or any objects that are present but not listed on the spreadsheet. After you choose your process, you need to determine what spreadsheets will be helpful to complete your process. Can your database produce these spreadsheets, and are there ways to filter the information? After certain sections or areas are inventoried, it is wise to update the collection management software on a regular basis. In doing so, you can stay up to date with the current locations of the objects you have inventoried before exhibition changeouts or object moves in preparation for shows. During the process, it is inevitable that you will come into contact with problem objects. These are objects with illegible numbers, no tags, duplicate numbers, or objects that are missing records and are not listed in your collection database system. It is best to isolate these objects together within a storage area to solve during the reconciliation process, or clearly record their location and problem to address later. At the completion of the inventory, you will have a list of objects that will need to be reconciled. Either they are objects that were not found but have object records, or objects that were found but have no records. The reconciliation process can become a project of its own, checking old locations, documentation, logbooks, and becoming a detective in order to solve the problem can be never ending. It is best to have a plan on what you will do with these problem objects. In 2014, we conducted our first complete inventory, and we dedicated 6 months to this project and hired 2 part-time workers for it. We inventoried roughly 10,000 objects and finished in our anticipated time. We needed a bit more time for reconciliation, and we found it beneficial to have 2 dedicated people to this project for several reasons. One person would locate and call out the object number while the other one marked it on the tracking sheet. It let us take turns doing each task since it was a monotonous type of job. We also needed more than one person to help move larger works of art. For instance, large matted works that were stored in our flat files. Based on the HARN audit process, the auditors wanted a visible way to determine if we had located an object in our inventory, and we decided the best way is to display with our database system. So the HARN Museum uses TMS, and we added inventory as one of the purposes for a move in our system. And you can see the circled area right there where it was inventoried for that particular object. In terms of plan of attack, we decided to conduct the inventory by location rather than collection. This way we could log everything in one particular location and confirm it was there, listed in the location, but not represented in the database system. The TMS system has an inventory report that can be printed by location, so that is how we went about figuring out a method to go through the space. Throughout the process, objects were found that weren't listed on the reconciliation page, and their locations were updated. If an object was not found but was listed on the reconciliation page, we would investigate old location moves and consult the rest of the department to see if they recalled seeing it. In most cases, we would first recheck the listed location, and sometimes, especially with paper sleeves, the object would get skipped over in the drawer. If the object still wasn't located, we would check to see if it was recently on display, and if so, we would check the object storage location that were similar in size to the object that was missing that was returned from that installation. These are just some of the methods that worked for us when locating missing objects. For found in collection objects, we would send pictures of all the information to the curators in order to jog their memories of why this is on the premises and if they could give us assistance on figuring out where it came from. Documenting and preparing for inventories and audits. Having accurate documentation of your objects aids in preparing for inventory, creating an easy way to log objects and location moves, and training your staff to correctly record these moves is key. One location move notebook per storage area helps centralize notebooks to certain rooms. Locations should be clearly labeled and have a practical hierarchy in your storage rooms. The storage rooms should be organized and neat so that objects are accessible and labels can be read. To help with the documentation and inventory project, the Harn created boxes to store objects on shelves with clear labels. These labels are legible and they can be seen from greater distances. Also, keeping your collection database up to date and accurate is another important aspect in preparing for the inventory. Each object should have its own record. The location moves for objects need to be updated on a regular basis, and quick spot inventories can help evaluate whether your records are updated. And when preparing for your inventory, find out what spreadsheets or forms would be helpful in the process. Will your database produce these forms? Using one notebook to store all your inventory spreadsheets is ideal, and it's convenient to also have a reconciliation page to record problem objects. In addition, I found it wise to have a camera to help capture objects that had no documentation or numbering. This way you can create a visual file as well to help sort out problem objects. Deciding what you want to include in your inventory needs to be determined at the beginning. Do you want to include mounts or accessories? Also determining who will be conducting the inventory. Are they trained in art handling? The Harn used interns to help with documenting smaller partial inventories, and trained art handlers were then charged to find and call out all of the object numbers. In each case, having a clear plan of attack with proper personnel, spreadsheets, and scope, this will make your inventory process go more smoothly.
That was great. Thanks so much, Liz. All of you actually did a wonderful job on doing this. This subject of inventories is something that, like, I know in my world, like, I hear the word and I'm kind of like, yeah, we'll do that in another year or so. Like, it's kind of a scary task because it is so dang big. You know what I mean, for your organization. I'm going to go ahead and ask if the folks down in South Florida have any questions on inventories or audits or any of the things the speakers may have spoken about.
Hello, we have one question. Okay, so our question is, what do most people use for tagging their objects these days? What is the most common thing that people are doing?
Like physically tagging? This is Robin.
Yes, physically tagging.
Well, I know for me that really depends on the object. So I'd be curious to hear what the folks. I know obviously it's slightly different with animals and with the straight archival collection. You guys are more than welcome to chime in, but I'm guessing for paper it's usually the folder that holds it in, right? It's usually the thing that you label on. For textiles, it can be a sewn-in label. I'll use paper tags, and people don't like paper tags, but I will use paper tags on things if it's appropriate. What about you all up in North Florida?
Well, for animals, if it's large enough to have a transponder implanted in it, it'll get a transponder. Obviously, sometimes they do ear tags and leg bands, and just depends on the type of animal.
This is Liz Rogers. So at the Harn Museum of Art, we like to use tags as well, or paper sleeves with the numbers on the outside. We've been steering away from actually like writing on the objects. Laura added, or B72 with Japanese paper. Yeah, so archival materials to tag was another thing added.
no staples and markers.
Yeah, I know the general rule in my world is that the tagging has to be reversible. So if you do anything to the actual object, which you try to avoid if you can, but if you do anything to the object, it needs to be able to be undone if time allows. You know what I mean? Like you don't want any kind of Sharpie markers on things. We have all seen Sharpie markers. Everyone's laughing around the table. I know I've seen Sharpie markers on things, but that's what you don't want to use. Um, stickers. We had a conversation about stickers here earlier today, which you don't want to see. But yeah, there's actually that's something that Lauren I've been throwing around is maybe doing some sort of marketing activity in the future because I think everyone would be pretty interested in that because there are some pretty different techniques on how you do it. So that's a good question. Anything else out of South Florida?
I think that's good. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Are there any questions up from North Florida that you'd like to throw out to the group?
No questions on our end.
Wonderful. I'm going to look around. Oh, we do have a question here in Lake Wales. Hold on 1 second.
This is really a question for Liz. With the inventory you did with your part-time people, was that all that was working on it, just those 2 part-time people, or were there full-time people working with them? And about how many hours a week are you talking?
There were 2 people. We were each 20 hours a week for 6 months is the timeline that we had to complete it. And we had separate funding for that, budgeted at the department.
So it was basically like 1 full-time equivalent, but 2 people, 20 hours a week?
Right. We decided that it would be better to have 2 people work on the project. So rather than hiring 1 full-time person for 6 months, we hired 2 people for part-time status, 20 hours a week to work on it.
I think if you hired 1 person for full-time to do that, you'd have to like include like mental health counseling at the end of the project. I know those of us who have done, that's like pretty brain numbing. Like it's hard to do inventory full-time, all the time. So I think that was a very good way of going about it.
And I found it beneficial having 2 people because trying to go through, your print cabinet drawers and look at the numbers and then reference your spreadsheet would get very tiring and you would probably miss things. So having a person audibly calling out the number and another person verifying if it is on the spreadsheet really worked for our system.
We have one other question here in Lake Wales. Hold on 1 sec. Could you talk a little bit more about the difference between doing an inventory by collection versus location? So like what would be a different, like what would spur you to do 2 different times of inventory, or what would be like just length of it or stuff like that, or what were you thinking like more? What's basically the benefit between doing location versus collection type for inventory?
So the reason for our complete inventory, we decided to do it by location so that we could assess all the objects in a specific location rather than by collection. So you can look in print cabinet drawer 1 and find all the objects rather than the objects that are just for the photography collection. It was a better way of figuring out what was in each location rather than just looking for a specific collection type through each drawer and then going back to that same drawer to look for, the African objects in that drawer.
This is Laura. I just also wanted to add to that what Liz is saying is that it keeps you from rifling through the drawer. So if you have maybe small paintings and you've got prints and you've got manuscripts all in the same drawer, if you're going through them by type, you're going to be going through that drawer 3 or 4 times, whereas doing it just going through the drawer as a location, she's only rifling through that collection once.
That's a really good
thing to add as well.
I would add that if you do use really good methods to do either version of that and you spreadsheet it, you can then sort all of your data by location or by collection or whatever you want to. So systematically, how you do your naming, your numbering, your standards, if you do that well, you can reorganize it however you like.
I mean, I know for me, it also kind of depends on what the state of the collections management is in. So if I know that like the database is not great, I'd probably be better off starting with doing the physical inventory because there'll be the stuff on the shelves, right? So I can go through the shelves and I can ask myself a couple different questions. Like I can ask myself, okay, has it been cataloged? Has it been numbered? Has it been rehoused properly? Has it been photographed? Like there's a couple basic questions I can ask myself. and then I can just start going through them. If the database is stronger than the physical, then I'd almost be like, well, I might be interested in printing out a copy of my database and then starting on collection base. But I think that's kind of a good question as to starting point on how you start it for me personally. I do find it very interesting how with the inventory, how like with Donna, with you all, I mean, it's just part of your like weekly and monthly maintenance. So I think with most of us who deal with inanimate objects, we're just like pushing it off per year. You know what I mean? Like if we see a yearly inventory, we're like, dang, that's ambitious, man. You know what it means to see something like that, a yearly full inventory. But I think it's also interesting that, you know, as we viewed them, they were all asking kind of the same questions, right? We're all just trying to keep track and keep a handle on what our objects are. And doing those full inventories, well, like what you said, Sandra, will give you good numbers, which is great because we were just joking at lunch today. Everyone, one of the first questions we always have with collections is, how many things do you have in your collection? And the answer is always like 3 different numbers. We're always like, well, we say we have this, but we actually have this, and then cataloged we have, you know. So I think having that physical inventory number, doing one of those, will really give you good hard numbers to answer that question, which will then lead you down the path for work plans for many years to come when it comes to rehousing and if you're going to get a new facility, what's going to happen there, and you know, it's all these random questions you might have, and will help you get grants too, because if you know you have to do a rehousing project and you have a good number, you will know what to budget for materials and whatnot. So that's something to keep in mind as well.